How many of you are familiar with Basecamp or 37 Signals? All right. Sweet. So this should be fun. Yeah, let's just bring them on. So Jason Fried, Adam Watham. Let's give them a hand. And can you make sure our lav mics are on?
Hello, hello, hello.
Can you
Test. Yep.
You guys everyone can hear us? No.
No.
Hello?
Test.
Hello?
Yep.
Is that better?
Yes.
It is. Okay, great. All right, so why don't we start with a softball? When's the last time you wrote some PHP?
I wrote PHP close to 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
I wrote that was the first programming language I ever learned. I wrote a program to organize my book collection. So I was like scraping Amazon via ISBN number.
Yeah.
And it turns out like I wanted to build this app, well, it wasn't an app, it was like, app was a new word now, but it wasn't that back then. And I wanted to build this book thing, and it turned out the book I bought on PHP, the example was how to build a book database. So I just stole that, basically, and typed that up, and then I made some changes, and then I got stuck. I didn't know how to do like pagination. I couldn't figure out how to move from page to page. And that's how I met David, actually.
Oh, no way.
Because I put that up on our blog, and David was a PHP programmer, and he's like, I can help you with that, and that's how we met.
No way?
Yeah, because I sucked at programming, basically.
If it wasn't for PHP, you wouldn't exist.
That's true. Yeah. Rails would not have happened for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
I think you had some questions because you went to their workshop.
Yep.
What's it called again?
The Basecamp Way to Work workshop. Yeah. So I went to the workshop that you guys hosted back in, I think it was June 2016, something like that. And it was just a really sort of inspiring and interesting experience, and a great look into how you guys actually deliver on features and stuff that you're building at Basecamp in a way that just seemed very different than what my experiences have been like at companies I've worked for, in terms of just how calm the processes were, and no one's running around trying to meet deadlines and stuff like that. But it still seems like you guys are getting tons and tons of stuff done at a really high quality bar too. So maybe the best place to start would be getting into like how many designers, developers, like just general people working on product are there at Basecamp these days?
Right, so number of people who work on Basecamp, like the core product. We have Basecamp on the desktop and iOS and Android. I'm just going to stick to the desktop for a moment, which is just web and the native desktop app. There's about 10, basically, who work on desktop and on the design and programming side. But then there's also people who work on infrastructure and security and support stuff, which is, of course, affects the product, but they're not what we consider core product developers.
Not delivering new features and
right.
stuff.
I mean, they're delivering infrastructure improvements, which improve the product, but they're not customer-facing things.
Got it.
So we basically have about 4 programmers, 4 designers, and then me and another guy kind of work on it too.
Awesome.
That's basically the team size, and then we work. We do have deadlines, but we keep them. And I think that's the thing. We don't have what we call dreadlines. Dreadlines are deadlines that no one believes are real.
Yeah.
And you just dread them.
So maybe that's a good topic to get into then. I think a lot of people, for a lot of teams, deadlines are that thing that goes zooming by as you're panicking to get the features done. But I know that you guys use deadlines as sort of a powerful tool more than like a stressor. So how do deadlines come into play in how you structure your work at Basecamp?
Sure. So the way we, can you guys hear me all right still? Yeah. The way we structure the work is we do projects that can take no longer than 6 weeks max at a time. So that's the first thing. Nothing we work on can take longer than 6 weeks. I say nothing with an asterisk because there are occasional research projects or stuff that we've never done before at all that we kind of give more time. But when we decide to build a feature in Basecamp, for example, and also, of course, if we're going to build a brand new version of the product from scratch, it's going to take longer than that.
Sure.
But right now, any feature we take on can take no longer than 6 weeks. And so we don't move the deadline, we move the scope of the work. So we say we have 6 weeks to do this, here's the general idea, here's what we want to do, and then it's up to the team to decide how to get that work done in 6 weeks at 40 hours a week. That's the other important part of this. Because you can do anything in 6 weeks if you make people work 100-hour weeks,
Sure.
but we don't do that either. So 40 hours a week, six weeks max, with a team of 3, max on any given feature, usually a team of 2, but sometimes 3. And that forces us to make a lot of trade-offs and decisions about what really matters, what doesn't matter, what's essential, what isn't. And then we negotiate as we go and figure out what we really need to do first and what we can hold off to doing last and what doesn't really matter as much. So if we have time to get it in, we can get it in, but if we don't get it in, that's fine too. And then we ship. And then there's always a variety of things that we wanted to do that we don't get done, and that's okay. And it has to be okay. Because if it's not okay, then you just keep doing work forever on the same thing and you never stop. And if you don't stop, you don't breathe, you don't have time to breathe. And then you also keep pushing through, which I just don't feel like is a really good, healthy strategy over the long term.
Yeah.
I think you want to, like, the best thing about working in 6-week cycles is that even if you hate the work you're doing, it's almost over when you start. And that's important because you don't always get to work on stuff that you love to do all the time. So it's a safety mechanism to say, even if this project isn't like the project you want to work on, it's almost over. And we can regroup at the end of 6 weeks and then decide what we're going to do next. So that's the other component here, which I'll say, is that we don't plan out anything beyond 6 weeks. So I know what we're about to do for the next 6 weeks, that's it. I don't know anything about what we're going to do after that or later this year or next year, don't know, don't care. We just figure it out as we go.
So you say like you never kind of design projects that are going to take longer than 6 weeks to build. I think one of the things that development teams struggle with a lot is just estimating how long it's going to take to do something. So how do you know that something's going to fit into 6 weeks? And maybe what are some examples of recent projects at Basecamp that have been like 6-week projects?
Yeah, so that's the problem right at the start. We don't estimate.
Yeah.
We have a budget. And it's very much like if you have money. Like, I have a budget, I can only spend this amount of money on whatever you're buying. And like, you don't, like, that's the number, and then you respect that and you figure out what you can buy with that money. That's how we think about projects, is that we have a 6-week budget. So that means that the scope is very flexible. So we have to figure out what really matters and what really doesn't. And then turns out you can do actually quite a lot of important work in 6 weeks, as long as you don't try and fit everything you could possibly do around the idea, then you can't do that. So that's important. There is a sense of understanding whether or not something's possible, but basically there is a 6-week version of everything, is kind of what we've come down to realize. And there's also 3-week versions of a lot of things. And so we don't give every project 6 weeks. We basically have a variety of different kinds of budgets within that 6 weeks. So we might take on a 6-week project, which is like a big new feature, like we just added, we're about to launch today or something, recurring events, which took about 6 weeks to build into Basecamp. But there's also 1-week projects and 2-week projects that we do in that time frame as well. So every 6 weeks we create a mix of big projects and small projects, which we can get done with a small team. And then that's it. And that's kind of how I know I'm like being vague because it's hard to be more specific than that, but it does come down to setting the budget and not setting estimates, because humans are terrible estimators. Like, I drive to work every day and I'm wrong about how long it's going to take every day, and I do it every day. Like, there's too many variables. In software development, there's even more variables in traffic. So there's just so many things you can do. So you gotta have a budget and then negotiate. Yeah. And the other thing is you have to let the team who's working on the work decide what's in and what isn't. So they have to have the power to make these cuts and decisions. We call it the scope hammer. So everyone can wield the scope hammer and like squash the project down to make it smaller and smaller. They have to make those calls. If it's me sitting over here telling them, no, this has to be in, they have to be able to say, yeah, it can't be though, because we only have 3 weeks left, and this is how we decided to do the work, and I have to respect that. So that's the other part of the thing too. You can't have the owner saying, no, it has to happen, because then that busts the budget. That doesn't work.
And how does that handover happen? Do you communicate the vision to the team, and then they just decide this is what fits and this is what doesn't? Or
yeah, this is an important point too, which is that no work is slated to be worked on until it's been thought through ahead of time. So we don't take the 6 week. Part of the 6 weeks is not figuring out what we're going to do. When we figure out what we're going to do, then we put together basically a rough sketch, description, vision, not a spec, but like, here's what we're trying to set out to do, here are the problems we're trying to solve, and here's roughly how we're thinking about doing it. Here's some of the pitfalls, here's some of the trade-offs we're probably gonna have to make, but here's like a general sense of where we're going with this. We've thought it through. So now when it's sort of delivered to the project team.
Who's we?
Usually two of us, me and Ryan.
Okay.
We typically, I think Ryan spoke at an event, one of your events last year, a couple of years ago, whenever it was. We were spending time prior to the cycle beginning, working this out and thinking this through. And sometimes this happens over a matter of months, sometimes it happens over a matter of days, sometimes it's a matter of hours, depending on the scale of the problem. And once we're convinced that we've got it 90% thought through, we'll kind of wrap it up in like a story, some sketches, an idea, which is like a page of text, okay? It's not all of these things have to happen. It's, here's the idea, hand it over to the product team that's going to be working on that, and work with them to figure out how to actually, like what's important, what isn't, and then they figure out what they're actually going to build based on that.
And it's hands off. You just let them go?
Yes, unless they, like we'll check in occasionally with them, or they'll pull us in, say, I'm struggling with this, or I'm stuck on this, or what do you think of this, or do you have any thoughts on this? But for the most part, it's very hands off.
And what does acceptance look like? Like when they're done, do you review it? Do you push back? What?
There's reviews and pushback along the way when necessary, but for the most part, they know what they need to get done, and we know what needs to happen, and then we like review it again at the end. But you never want to get to the end for your first review. That's like not fair to anybody, because there's going to be things that pop up. So we're looking at things along the way. They write up their, in Basecamp has this feature called daily check-ins, where they can write, everyone's expected to write what they worked on today at the end of the day automatically. So we're kind of paying attention to that, and just we're using the thing as they're building it, and we kind of work, it's a very small team, so it's not like there's 50 project teams working, there's like 2 project teams working on stuff, 2 or 3. So we're very up on that, we're paying attention, and by the end of the 6 weeks, it's been vetted, QA's been involved as well, and it's pretty clear that this is going to ship, and it's going to be good, and it goes out. So it's not these big, huge, show us what you're going to put out on the last day, because there's no more time for changes. You have to be changing this and looking at it along the way.
And none of that's structured. There's no stand-ups.
No meetings. No stand-ups, no meetings. There's just daily write-ups about what you worked on today. Yeah, we don't have... Of course, everyone loves that. We have no scheduled meetings at Basecamp in any capacity. And there are no daily anythings, except for at the end of the day, you summarize what you worked on by writing it up in your own words.
Yeah.
And you work with the team and you figure it out. That's what your job is, to figure it out. And it's not to be told what to do, and not to have to wait for someone to approve it. There's no approvals, no formal approval process at all. It's like, we hired you because you're great at what you do. I should be trusting you to do that. And if you need my help, pull me in, but I'm not going to tap you on the shoulder every day. That's not what I want to do, and it's not what anyone wants either. So
yeah, how many of you want to be tapped on the shoulder every day? Okay,
nobody, right? So the information flows around enough that we all have a pretty good sense of what's going on, and it's up to the teams to say, there's a blocker here, there's something that's not, we have a question, or we're stuck, or there's a big unknown that we just uncovered. Then they'll come to us and we'll help them through it. Yeah. But other than that, they're trusted to get everything done. And pretty much 95% of things really do get done.
So what are you doing while the team's off working in this 6-week cycle?
So, great question. To justify my own existence, basically. I'm thinking about what we're going to possibly do in the next 6 weeks. We just finished a book, so I'm writing books, writing blog posts, like working with other teams in the company. So I'm kind of roaming around, thinking about what we're going to probably be working on next, seeing what the problems are, and just generally thinking a lot and writing a lot, internally and externally, and getting ready for the next cycle. And then also just as business decisions, like what do we, like, for example, we went down from 4 products to 1 product. Now we're thinking maybe about doing another product, which is not something that it's something we said we wouldn't do, that we're thinking about maybe doing. So I've been working a lot on concepting something else that may happen or may not. So I've been playing with that. And I give talks and just kind of doing that and helping the team. I see myself as an editor, basically. And I'm not really in day-to-day production of the production work as much anymore, other than helping when necessary.
Okay, you've proven yourself. You can keep your job.
Maybe. I'm not worth it for sure, but there's things that come up and that I have to do, and so my weeks are very different. Every week's different. I don't have a routine or like a daily thing. It's just kind of whatever needs my involvement, I'll get involved with.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about like asynchronous communication, like everyone is sort of checking in at the end of the day. This is what I got done, and at the end of the day can
on their own time.
Different for different people, right? On their own schedule, that sort of thing.
Yes.
What do you do in terms of trying to schedule like overlap between different teams and stuff for the things that come up that really do need like an urgent answer, or have you figured out a way to just judo that problem away?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're very careful about is we don't want to set up dependencies in our organization where like one team has to wait on some other team to be able to move forward on anything. We want to glide by each other versus like grind gears. I think a lot of companies that I've run into are too dependent upon different groups, and so they can't move. They're stuck all the time. And they're stuck all the time, but there's a deadline coming up, and there's all these conflicts that make everyone really stressed out, and work is not calm because of that. So it's very rare that a group needs another group to do something to ship anything at Basecamp. Almost never. Unless there's some new infrastructure, there's a migration, but the teams can handle that themselves as well. But sometimes there's something that's necessary, and then that should be known early and discussed early, so no one's waiting on anyone at the end. That's just, you don't ever want to wait on anything at the end. That's just where stress elevates and deadlines are busted and bad things happen. So there's very little overlap required. It's really these independent teams of 2 or 3 people doing what they need to do, and they have full permission to do everything they need to do in the app to get the thing out. Mm-hmm. They're in charge of their own database stuff, they're in charge of their own migrations, they're in charge of all that stuff. They'll consult with the ops team if there's something that's going to be very intensive on the back end that they're going to need, or like this migration might run over 4 days. What's that going to mean? Some of that stuff, but they do all that. They do all the deploys. They do all that stuff themselves. So they don't wait. We don't queue things up for someone else to pull the lever.
Yeah.
Every team can do that themselves.
Is there a lot of real-time collaboration like within teams, or are you sort of like
sometimes
hired to optimize for people who just really like working by themselves on problems?
I think sometimes anything that's real time is considered collaboration, when oftentimes it's really not collaboration, it's distraction. There's this sense that 2 people talking there's always a benefit, but oftentimes there's not. Teams can work, like in Basecamp, we do have chat rooms built into Basecamp, so like we do have some of that collaboration happening in real time, but for the most part, it's very quiet at our company. And people are heads down doing their work. They're part of the project, and when they need to talk to someone else, they do. But there is not constant chatter all day long around what's being done. You cannot get work done if you're talking about work all day long. That's not, like, the talking of the work is not the work. And there's no reason to be talking about work 8 hours a day. Like, you should know what you need to do, and you can occasionally talk to people, and we do. But for the most part, we prefer asynchronous communication, which is writing things up in Basecamp, posting them, and letting other people get back to you when they're ready. Versus real-time communication, which I think is mostly a terrible thing in businesses, and I think people are beginning to feel the impact of that. People are very stressed out. There's fear of missing out. People are involved in a dozen real-time conversations all day long. Like, you can't do that and then go home at 5 and also have a productive day. You just can't do that. So we tend to be asynchronous, which seems slower, and it is slower, and that's okay. Like, what's the rush? What's the rush to get immediate answers? Unless there's truly urgent emergencies, fine. But most things can wait. And I think it's really good to develop a culture where things can wait. You write something up, someone gets back to you in the afternoon or the next morning when they have time. Like, that's fine. There's other work for you to do in the meantime. You don't need to be waiting on edge. And if you're in the position where you're waiting on edge and you can't do something until you get an answer, then you've put too much into that answer. And I think that this is a cultural thing that you have to develop over time, which is like, there shouldn't be any urgency at work, basically. And I know that's unusual, but I think it's important if you want to like be sane and run a relatively calm company, which I think is what people should be after. That's not to say there aren't things that go wrong, and of course there are, but for the most part, if you were watching how we work, you'd be bored out of your fucking mind because there's nothing to see. People always be like, can I shadow you for a day? Like, no, you'd be bored. There's nothing happening. I'm doing my work, you're doing your work, you're doing your work, and there's very little communication that's actually happening throughout the day. There are communication that's happening is asynchronous, and it's also like to-dos getting checked off or discussions that are happening, but happening at a slow cadence versus like constant chatter. I don't understand the constant chatter requirements, basically.
So I just want to, because for a lot of people, that kind of work is very foreign. So a developer working on Basecamp, how much of their time in a day is spent just coding?
Hopefully all of it. I mean, hopefully, really, truly, my responsibility is to make sure that everybody in our company has 8 hours to themselves every day. The full day. Now, that doesn't mean they choose to have 8 hours to themselves, because they might hook up with someone and talk about some stuff. But they don't go to work going, fuck, I only really have 2 hours today because I'm in this meeting and that meeting and I've got to do this thing and there's this other thing. No, you can have your whole day to yourself, and then you choose how much of your day you want to involve other people in. That's the goal, and although we don't like have goals in the traditional sense, but that's the idea. And that to me is my primary responsibility, is to protect my employees' time and attention so they have all of it. So a lot of people at work, they might have 2 or 3 or 4 hour stretches truly to themselves, and they'll take a break or they'll talk to someone about something, but that's what you get. And when you have that, you can get a ton of stuff done. I always liken people say there's no time in the day, like they look at the clock or whatever, and it's like 4 o'clock already. They're like, where'd the day go? 8 hours is a long time. If you've ever flown from London to Chicago, that's an 8-hour flight. And there's not a point in that flight where you're like, this is really fast. like this takes forever. You look at your watch, like, fuck, it's still 4 hours to go. 8 hours is a long time. It's a long time. And work should feel like a long day at 8 hours. It should feel like, fuck, I'm glad this is finally over, versus like, where did it all go? It should never feel like, where did it all go? It should feel like an international flight, which is a long time. And the reason days don't feel like that for most people is because they're chunked into these small, tiny bits, and they don't actually have any time to do the work.
Yeah.
Like, imagine flying from Chicago to London and stopping at an airport every 15 minutes. It'd be exhausting, and that's what the work is like for a lot of people. So we push as hard as we can against that, and a lot of that is tooling, not depending on chat rooms all day long, not being in the real-time rush all the time.
Yeah.
Also, not expecting people to get back to you immediately, just like eliminating this expectation of immediate response. And people get back to you when they're ready, because it's really arrogant, actually, to expect someone else to stop what they're doing to answer your question. You're basically suggesting that whatever I have to ask you is more important than what you're working on.
Yeah.
And really, it's not that way most of the time.
Is there? Oh, that's pretty good.
Thank you. I mean, and let me also, it's taken us years to get to this point where we're finally it wasn't always this way, but we have always had this feeling of like, what's the rush? What are we all chasing? These are man-made artificial targets we're mostly chasing most of the day. Mm-hmm. Why? Why does it have to be that way? We do think, though, that a deadline is important. Stopping is important. Forcing work to happen in a certain time frame is important. Otherwise, things go on forever, and that's not healthy either. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
And is there, when people come to work for you, do they have to adjust? How do they know that this is the thing? How do you communicate? Do you sit them down and read them rework, or what do you do to communicate this is the way you work?
We're getting better at that, because we were quite bad at it for a while. We would just sort of drop people in and they would figure it out as they went, and actually worked out pretty well when we were smaller, but we're a little bit larger now. So it's 54 people in the company now. It's the largest we've ever been and the largest we ever want to be. So we actually have a hiring freeze. We've decided, not because things are going poorly, because things are actually going the best they've ever gone. This is the moment to say, no more people. Yeah. We should be able to do everything we want to do with our team. And if we can't, then we either don't do it, we simplify it so we can, or we wait. That's the answer. Versus, let's hire it more, let's hire it more, let's hire it more to do more things, because then you end up structuring a business that's always doing more things.
Yeah.
And that's why most companies end up getting out of control and collapsing under their own weight at some point. So anyway, but to your point, we've gotten better at onboarding now by sort of having a buddy system. When someone comes on, they work closely with someone else for a month. Basically, we give them small projects to work on. We don't just drop them on the biggest project we're working on, like kind of get to see how this works.
Yeah.
And since we don't hire very often, we're not hiring at all right now, but we maybe would hire 1 or 2 people a year. We can pick people who know us really well, who sort of have heard about how we work and are like looking forward to working that way. If we had to bring in 100 people a month like to work this way, I think it'd be very, very challenging. So part of this is slow growth, intentionally small company, and being very deliberate about these things. But there's loads of missteps with new employees. Like their expectations are, it's hard for them to really see how it is until they live through it for a few months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also depends on where they're coming from. So if someone's coming from a big company, sometimes it's hard. If someone's coming from a small company that was very structured before, it's hard. So we kind of have to remember when you hire somebody, they have to, like, you're hiring their previous experience as well, not just their like output, but their expectations and their habits. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of have to keep that in mind too. And so it's a part of the decision-making process when we hire someone is, can they unlearn some of these things? And some people can, some people can't. But we've been getting better at bringing people on board.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have people who've been with us for a long, long, long time. So a lot of our team has been with us for 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years, which is really rare in this business. So we have like this core that really knows this stuff really well. And they get to work with new people, so they kind of can rub off on them a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm trying to think of is like any little tips or tricks that could help people get into a better mode of like asynchronous communication and keeping people in the loop without having lots of meetings and stuff like that. And the one thing that comes to mind is the feature you talked about in Basecamp, where you have like the automatic check-ins that kind of like pulls that information from people kind of at their own pace. How important do you think that has been to making your asynchronous communication effective? And do you have any other like hacks or suggestions that can help people get a better understanding of what everyone's doing without having to be pinging people for answers all the time?
Yeah, part of it is, so we ran into this problem where, naturally a lot of people in the company want to know what's going on in the company. That's a natural thing, right? And at a lot of companies that run things like Slack or tools like that, that basically means you're checking in on all these channels. You're following like all these projects that are going on. Problem with that is you get these red dots, you get these notifications, like you want to clear them out or you want to see what's going on, and so you don't even know what the hell they mean, because a red dot doesn't mean anything. It just means there's something. And the only way to know if it was worth looking at is to look at it. So you're looking at something to find out if it was worth looking at, which is like the most distracting, horrible process of staying up on things. But there's a natural tendency to want to know what's going on. People want to know, be informed, so like, what do you do? So we figured out there's basically 2 resolutions of, I don't know if that's the right word, but we'll call it that for a second, of like staying on top of things. There's the day-to-day, like, not what's happening in a project, but what are people working on. We found out that what's happening in a project, following like chat rooms to find out what's happening in a project is the wrong level of detail. What you want to see is what are people working on in their own words. So at the end of every day, about 4 o'clock, Basecamp sends a notification out to everybody, says, what'd you work on today? And people write it up in their own words. Some people write like a few bullet points, some people write paragraphs, like some people are very detailed, some people are very short, some people don't do it at all. And that's fine, totally optional. It's, by the way, also completely optional. But when people describe their own work in their own words, you get a much richer summary of like what's actually happening on a project by looking at the people and not the project. So that's the first thing. So that happens every day. There's also the first Monday, or every Monday morning, Basecamp says, what do you plan on working on this week? So people kind of write up in a very general sense, well, here's sort of the stuff that I'm probably working on this week. Some feature, whatever, here's what I'm struggling with, whatever it is. So like there's once a week, you have a general sense, and this is asynchronous, so people write it up and you check it out whenever you want, if you want, right? There's not a meeting, there's just writing, right? So once a week you have a general sense, every day you have a more specific sense, and then roughly once a month, the team lead who's working on a project will write up what we call a heartbeat, which is like a very detailed, long-form summary of what the team has been working on. So at those 3 different levels of resolution or detail, everybody can be as in the loop as they want to be or as out of loop as they want to be on their own time, versus having to follow things real time and try to piece together what the hell's going on across many different places and many different, across the company, and then feel like you're basically watching 24-hour news. Work is not news. That's the other thing I want to be very clear about. Work should not feel like a ticker. You do not need to know what's happening in real time all the time. You just don't. There's nothing that's that important that you need to know. So you pay attention to your own work, and then you can check in by reading other people's writings as frequently as you feel necessary. But they're summaries. They're not the actual real-time things, because there's so much noise that you don't need to pay attention to. So it's that level of understanding. We've kind of figured this out over time, that those 3 detail levels are enough to stay on top of things without having to follow anything. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I know I'm being abstract, like I'm not pointing to something that's real. Like in our workshops we do these workshops where we put our version of Basecamp, like our account, up on the screen and walk through the whole damn thing. And like, this is actual, like, real stuff. I'm not doing that here, so I'm trying to describe it as best I can, and hopefully there's enough detail there to make the point. But fundamentally, no one's following line by line what's happening in the company. There's no need for that. It is totally unnecessary and unhealthy, I believe, to do that.
Do you have a dashboard, or like, are there numbers you're checking every day?
No. I don't look at any numbers on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, or month-to-month basis.
Has that changed, or have you never done it?
Never been interested in it. So we don't have, so at Basecamp we don't have any goals, any financial targets, anything we're trying to hit, other than profitability. So if we are profitable by $1 or by $1 million or 10, I'm just making up numbers here. As long as we're profitable, which means all of our expenses are paid and there's something left over, happy.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't care if we grow 3% one year and 30% another year, or we're flat. Flat's even okay, would be fine. Like, I don't really care about those things. I've never been driven by that. So I don't look at those things. We don't have KPIs. We don't have charts of any kind. We have we have 2 people on the data team who will write up, again, like, this is about having information presented to you versus me following stuff. Mm-hmm. So like, we have charts when the data team writes up, like once a quarter, basically they'll write up a financial summary for David and I. Okay. I can get to that information earlier if I want to, no reason to. Yeah. No reason to. I don't even want to think about it. Doesn't matter. So once a quarter, I'll get a write-up, a really, really great detailed report, right? With narrative. This is the thing I don't like about dashboards. There's no narrative. There's just like numbers and charts. Like, I want to hear the story. I want to understand how it relates. Like, and I want someone to tell me this. Someone who knows what they're looking at to tell it to me versus me like looking at a chart that's, anyway, so there's that.
Can you give me an example though of what would a story about, in your case, like, is it like, this is how profitable we are? Like, I don't understand. What's the concrete?
So for example, like, signups were down in March because we've been doing some A/B testing, and one of the variations didn't really come through. So this is going to be a short-term decline in sales based on historical models. Like, there's history, and there's like what's going on around it too. Because if you look at just data points, like, well, what's causing that point? What put that point there? Sometimes you can't just say it's traffic or it's this or sales. Like, what was going around the sales? Like A/B testing, or we tested something else, or we tried to mess with the thing, or there were 3 days when the site wasn't performing as well as it should have been for some other reason. Like, fill me in on the color. The color commentary of the numbers is important to me.
Yeah.
Because if you see something went down, you're like, oh, should I be alarmed? No, this is just a seasonal thing, and actually not even a seasonal thing. It was like a weekly thing. So we did this test. It didn't really perform well, so we're going to see a little blip there. No big deal. Don't worry about it. Historically, we're still fine. Next month, I expect this to happen. And then you find out that it happened, and you're okay. So it's kind of that color that's really useful. But you have to trust the people who are giving the numbers.
Yeah.
And also, I can go in, like, I have access to the data. I just don't choose to go look at it. It's like, for example, I think it's really unhealthy if you own a stock to look at the stock price every day. You don't, like, if you're in it for the long term-ish, like, look at it occasionally. But every day, or like day trading, or like looking at it throughout the day, that's unhealthy, I believe. And so that's what I don't want to do, is I don't want to look at dashboards that are telling me stuff intraday.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I going to do with that? Other than be anxious and worry, like, or be thrilled. But like, again, even if I'm thrilled, like, if I'm going to be in this constant state of being thrilled or disappointed, like, that's not a healthy place to be, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, part of the reason you would want to look on that is to see, am I on track? And so it sounds like you're saying, but I try to figure out if I'm, like, if we're profitable, we're on track. Is there other things that let you know you're on track? Like, is there any qualitative metrics? Like, is there anything else you're kind of keeping up with, or not really?
Part of it is like, you have to have enough of a sample size to know if you're on track or not. So when we do like A/B testing, for example, we don't look at the A/B test until it's over. I don't look at it 2 weeks in. Let's say we figure out it's going to take about a month to get a statistically sound sample. We're not looking at it 2 weeks in because it doesn't matter. So it's all about training yourself to figure out what matters and what doesn't when it comes to feature development, when it comes to data, when it comes to all this stuff. Like, it matters once the sample size is large enough that now we can, with a certain degree of confidence, know if this was good or bad.
So would you get a report, like you've just launched recurring events?
Yeah.
What does success look like? Like, how do you know that that was a good thing to build?
So to be specific, we only A/B test marketing site stuff.
Okay.
Stuff that drives funnel stuff.
Yeah.
Right? We don't A/B test feature development. We only build something when we know there's demand for it, either external, and we know it really well, that we know when we launch it, it's going to serve that demand, or a feature that we just know we want. No one's requesting it, but we just want to build it. Like, we built something recently called Hill Charts, which is a totally new invention. It's a different way to look at the status of a project. We realized that projects, and no customer asked for this.
Yeah.
This is like an innovation. We had this idea and we went for it, which is this idea that projects, basically, you cannot look at projects linearly. You look at them more like on a hill. There's an uphill phase where you're figuring shit out and you don't quite know how to do it yet. And there's a downhill phase, which is the execution. And you feel, in any given project or any given thing, you know where you're at. Like, well, we're still going uphill on this, or are we going downhill on this? And so we built this way to look at a project in terms of a physical hill. And it's an intuitive feel. The dots don't move on, you plot dots on this hill, and you're moving them yourself. The system doesn't move them. Anyway, that was an example of a feature where we had this intuition that this would be a better way to look at projects, so we built that. Is it successful or not? It's successful only if we use it. If other people use it, great. We built it for ourselves, and we think other people are going to use it, and they have. There's other features that, like recurring events, has been a long-standing request for a long time, and we finally decided to tackle it. We knew the problem, we understood it well, we knew how to build it, we finally built it. It will be successful because we did what we knew people wanted it to do. I'm not measuring how often it's used, I don't care.
Yeah.
We know enough, we know the demand is there because we've been hearing about it for years. Customer service has reminded us for years or for months that, like, people really want this, people really want this. We all do support as well, so we all rotate through support, so everyone in the company does customer service too. We've heard it over and over. It's very clear that this should be something we bite off, we chew it, and we do it. And then we know it's going to be successful. Now, we will also hear if we didn't hit it quite on the nose. And we're going to hear that by hearing, customer service is going to hear that. It's not about, like, is this used by 19.2% of the people versus 14.2%? Like, that doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah, so it's more of a feel.
It's a feel, very intuitive feel, and that's how we've always done things. And we have attempted to measure things, and it just goes against how we want to run our own business. And so we've decided you got to get to know who you are. Some companies, and by the way, everything I'm talking about is what works for us. I'm suggesting some things would be better off if you didn't pay attention to chat rooms all day long. I do think that is a qualitative improvement in your quality of work life. But as far as like looking at stats versus intuition, you just got to know who you are and what you want to do. So I know some people love looking at stats. They love seeing numbers move. If you love that, do it, but understand what it's doing to you. Just like day traders are manic because they are paying attention to the stock all day long because they're trying to get in and out. They're looking at making money on a quarter-point move, fine.
Yeah.
But if you're not in that world, you should not be looking at the stock price every day. And just like me, I'm not going to make any different decisions tomorrow based on a piece of data I received today about something from yesterday. That's not how I think and how I make decisions. So that's why I don't look at those things.
Yeah.
Cool. One question that I have for you, kind of came to me when we were talking about the hill chart stuff.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know how you use to-dos at Basecamp, maybe differently than other teams, have project managers putting tickets into a system and assigning them to people.
Yeah.
Who's creating to-dos? What are people using to-dos for? Because I think from the outside, the Basecamp to-do system is a lot maybe simpler than a lot of these other sort of task tracking tools. So
sure.
How do you use it?
Very simply, each individual list is a scope of work. Now, I have to probably define what that means, but let's say we're doing recurring events, okay? There might be 7 or 8 separate to-do lists related to that one feature, because there's different parts of the feature. There's like what happens when you delete a recurring event? You have to, do you want to delete all future instances of that event or just the current, if there's enough work tied up in that part of the feature alone, it gets its own to-do list. And on that to-do list are all the design-related tasks and program-related tasks together on that single list. We do not have a design list and a programming list and a whatever list, because the scope of work is when all those items are checked off, that scope of work is done. If you have a design list and a programming list and you check off the design list, that doesn't tell you anything about where a feature stands. That only tells you design is done. Well, so what? What does that mean? So let's say we have 7 or 8 different individual to-do lists with only, let's say, a dozen to-do items per list. And we can tell at any given time by looking at each list where a chunk of the work for that project is. And when all the items for that list are completed, that chunk of work is done, and we can not think about it anymore. We can move on to other chunks of work. And chunks of work are being completed simultaneously, but all the items to get something done live on that particular list, and they're all chunked out by scopes of work for that feature. So who can add items to the list? The team that's working on it adds items to the list. There's no such thing at Basecamp as someone else who puts things on other people's lists. Unless we have some teams, like for example, the data team has a list in their project called data requests. So if I want to know some piece of data that I can't find myself, I can put that on their list. That list is there to have stuff put on. But nobody else populates lists of work in progress except for the teams that are doing the work, because they're using the list to track the work they know they need to get done. Again, I wish I had a picture to show you, but it's very simple. It's extremely simple. There's never like hundreds of items on a list. There's a dozen at any one time. And if there's too many items on a list, it probably says that you haven't scoped the work correctly. This list should probably be broken into 2 separate lists. You're probably tackling too much on this individual list. So I know this is hard to maybe explain without seeing it, but that's it. We don't track every tiny minutia piece of detail. So it's not like, for example, designing a form. It would say design the form. It wouldn't be a check mark or a to-do for this field, a to-do for this field, and a to-do for this field, and a to-do for this pull down, and error checking. No, it's design the form basically. And when that form is done, it's checked off, and the designer knows what that means. And everyone else knows what that means. So we don't over-track. And I think that's another thing, because when you begin to over-track, that's another project in itself, which is maintaining these hundreds of individual items and then asking people, is this done, is this done? None of that.
Cool.
Again, hard to talk about to-dos in that sense, but it's definitely a very different way of working. But it's a much simpler, more direct way of working. And it's less frustrating. It's nothing more frustrating than working on something and seeing it expand. When you're not putting the things on the list to make it expand. If you're putting the things on the list to make it expand, fine. If all of a sudden things are just expanding and you've got a deadline coming up, and you've got work to do, and you're being pulled into meetings all day, it's no wonder everyone's working longer hours and working on the weekends, because there's no time to do the work, and the work's getting bigger. A very core fundamental point of view at Basecamp is that as you go on a project, it should be narrowing in, not widening out. If it's widening out, we're doing something wrong. It should be narrower. There should be less to do as we go, not more to do as we go. And that's a big part of the discipline of scope, managing scope, making trade-offs, making concessions, saying we cannot do this. Narrower as you go, not widen as you go. Very important.
What's an example of a feature maybe that's been worked on recently where you had to reduce scope to meet the deadline?
Every project.
Can you give
Every
a specific
project.
example, though,
yes.
of like something that was
yes.
cut?
Recurring events. So with recurring events, you can, so in Basecamp, on any event, you can hit this link, subscribe to it in your calendar, which pulls it into Outlook or Google Calendar or Apple Calendar, right? A recurring event, if you click the add this item, or add this to my calendar on an event, and it's a recurring event, we've decided that we can only add that instance of the event to your calendar, not all future events as well. So we had to make the trade-off, which is not a good, it is a good trade-off, but it's not ideal, which is the expectation would be if I had a recurring event like, we don't have stand-up meetings, but let's say you do, like Monday morning stand-up meeting, 9 a.m., recurs every week automatically. If you clicked add to my calendar, you would expect that event to show up in your calendar every Monday. We had to make the call to not do that now, which is not great, but that's what a trade-off is.
Yeah, the alternative would be the feature doesn't get delivered.
The whole feature doesn't get delivered because we have to get that done. So what we know is if this ends up being a problem, we can always come back to it and decide to fix it later if we need to. But we had to make the call in order to get this thing done. And it's like objectively, I feel like shitty that we can't deliver that feature to our customers, but that is one of the trade-offs and one of the penalties of making decisions is that we can't do everything. We also traded off. So it's not like that happened in isolation. We said, we're actually going to do something else instead. So what we decided was, for a while, it was kind of like, should we do that, or should we allow you to end a recurring event? So for a while, recurring events would go forever. So you'd say like every Monday morning, stand-up meeting, and it would go like forever. But we said like, what's more important? Do we want to build this feature where the calendar item that you add to your own personal calendar has these limits on it, has a recurrence on it, which is actually ultimately a bit challenging to do because different calendaring systems do this differently? Or do we want you to allow you to specify when this recurring event ends in Basecamp? So like, for the next 6 months, every Monday, So we decided that was more valuable for more people, so we picked that instead. So it's not just a trade-off against nothing, it's a trade-off against something, and you kind of negotiate.
Yeah.
So that's one of the examples.
And who's making that?
The team.
So
I didn't even find out about.
You said we, so you're
Yes.
saying the team is saying this is the trade-off.
Yes.
We're going to reduce the scope, and they just have that autonomy.
They have that autonomy. They have to, because if they don't have that autonomy, I have to make every decision that exists in the. That's not sustainable either. And if I go on sabbatical, or I go on paternity leave, or I'm sick, or I go on the company would halt. That you cannot build. If that's the practice, you're in trouble, I think. So the team has full autonomy to decide. If they feel like this is a big one, I don't know if we feel comfortable making that call necessarily without consulting Jason or Ryan or David or Jeff or someone else. They'll come to us and say, we're struggling with this one. We're not sure which one is worth it. Can you give us, what's your take?
Yeah.
And my take will always be, here's my take, but it's your call. It's how I always code it.
It's an interesting model because sometimes if you're always having to go to someone and say, is this okay? They know nothing about the project. They haven't been in the weeds.
Well, that's the other problem. If I'm not paying attention to every detail and then someone asks me for an important detail, it's not my place to tell them. That's called drive-by feedback, which we all hate, right? Like, someone comes in from the outside who's not paying attention, and I'm like, no, it should be this way, or it should be that way. Like, that sucks to receive that feedback. I don't want to be the person giving that kind of feedback.
Yeah.
Ever. So the other important thing is that I want people to be thinking all the time. I don't want people to outsource their brain to me or to someone else. And so I want people to have the responsibility to decide what's worth doing and what isn't, because they're going to get better at that. And that creates a more resilient organization than if the points of failure are only reserved for 2 or 3 people at the top who, we're not fucking geniuses. I don't know the right answer to this either. Like, this is just an opinion. So, like, your opinion's probably more valuable. You're on the ground. You're working on this thing. So I value that. And, of course, I have a point of view, too, that I will bring to the equation if asked, but I technically can, of course, override decisions, but like I reserve that for the most extreme cases where I feel like there's like an existential threat if we make this mistake, something like that.
How many times have you done that?
I don't recall ever doing that.
Really?
Yeah.
So you can't...
Because we don't make decisions like that. First of all, again, like 6-week projects, so like the likelihood that we're going to make a decision over a 6-week project that's going to like materially harm the business, very low. If there's a project we work on for 4 years, and then like that's probably a really important project if that's the only thing we're working on 4 years, like I can see myself getting more involved in that. But 6 weeks, like how much harm could we really do if we screwed something up? Not that much. And that's built in, so we have these checks. But there's never been something where I've completely overridden anything, I don't think, ever. There are moments when I will make a decision. For example, do we have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
For example, last year, we changed our pricing in Basecamp. We used to have multiple tiers, and we said, fuck that, no more multiple tiers, we're gonna have one price, $99 a month, which was 3x our old price on the lowest level. And I just sort of had this hunch that like, we did this price analysis, I was sort of curious, like where do we fit? Turns out Basecamp was the cheapest product out of like 30 things in our area, and that bothered me. Because I'm like, does this mean we're only good because we're the cheapest? First of all, and I feel like we're way more valuable than the price we were charging. So I pitched this, I didn't really pitch it, I said, we're doing this, which is like, we're gonna raise our prices to $99 a month. We're gonna change our business model of one thing, $99 a month. And I know we're gonna lose some signups, but I like have a hunch that we're going to be okay there.
Yeah.
And there are moments, I believe, and I use this analogy, that like we could A/B test our way there, but we would probably find out that by A/B testing that, because we've done tests in the past where like the more expensive it is, the fewer signups we get. Like we would have convinced ourselves not to do it. But there are moments in life, and I say this where you just get up and you move. So like let's say you live in a small town and you want to move to New York, you don't like move to a slightly bigger town first and then a slightly bigger town next. And you're like, no, fuck it, I'm gonna go to New York and I'm gonna make it work.
Yeah.
And I know I can always go back to my old small town if I have to, but I cannot A/B myself to New York.
Yeah.
I cannot graduate myself to New York. I mean, I could, but it'd be really inefficient. Sometimes you just fucking get airdropped. Like someone picks you up and they drop you there and you have to survive. And that's how we did, and we don't do this often, but that's how we do with the pricing thing. Like, we're just gonna do it. And then we're gonna have to figure out how to make it work. Just like if you move to New York, you have to figure out how to make it work. You're not gonna go home the next day. And occasionally we do that. And so we did that with that. So I reserve that, which is like a fundamentally could be destructive decision. That's my responsibility, so I'll save that for myself.
Yeah.
But that's like the nuke button. Like there should only be a few people with that responsibility.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened. That idea would not have bubbled up through the company. Someone else wouldn't have done that. That's like what I reserve for myself.
Yeah.
But those are the only kind of decisions I reserve for myself.
And what was the lead up to that? Were you were just thinking about it and thinking a lot about it, and then you decided, or you had your data team do some analysis? Like, what's the?
We looked at, we did the competitive price analysis out of curiosity. I took counsel from other people in the business, like Noah, who's our head data guy. Like I asked him, what do you think? I talked with David. David and I debated it pretty heavily for a while. I talked to a few other people. I got perspective on it and points of view.
Yeah.
And I still felt very comfortable with the idea at the end of the day. And
was David against it?
Initially, yeah. Everyone was against it initially. And so here's how it played out. It turned out to be a good decision in the end. Our signups went down by about a quarter, but average ticket price went up by more than 2x, and retention also went up, because when people pay more for something, they value it more, and they give it more of a shot. So we ended up like being basically 66% better than we were on sales, and retention's even better than we were, I believe. I'm kind of not fudging the numbers, I'm getting them a little bit off, because it's changed a bit, but it was absolutely worth the move. The thing that's important here is that if you're a company that's driven by the number of customers you have, you would have seen this as a negative. We're not driven by that. So for us, if we have fewer customers, that's okay, because we're driven by profitability, and these customers are now more profitable than just a raw customer count. So it also depends on what you're like looking for. And also, we decided as a company that in some ways we actually would prefer growing slower and having fewer customers come in the door, because we have a hiring freeze in place, and the team that has to hire up when we have more customers is customer service. And so if we're growing really rapidly in terms of a customer, our customer base grows, but if we're growing rapidly, we have to hire more customer service, which we don't really want to do. So this is another way to temper that in a sense. It's like a restaurant only has a certain number of tables, and like they can, if maybe they decide they want to serve fewer customers and they might get rid of a table, doesn't mean the business is bad. It means that maybe they raise their prices, or maybe they just want to serve a different customer base. So we kind of made all those decisions and said we're very comfortable with that. And so we did that, and it turned out to work. But that's not to say that I was right or wrong. It's just like it was a bet that we made. And the other thing I'll say is it wasn't actually that risky, because we didn't change prices on any of our existing customers. We never do that. This is only for new customers.
Gotcha.
So even if this did not work at all, we still had 100,000 plus customers paying us on the old pricing scheme, which was fine. So part of it is like, how do you limit your risk? And take big bets, make big bets, but limit your risk. And so we kind of do that sort of thing too.
Yeah. Great. Do you have anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Now we're right up against lunch, but I know every time I listen to a podcast, sometimes I want to scream at the pod catcher because I've got a question. Is there someone with a burning question they want to ask on the microphone right now? Is there anyone? Okay. You can come up and ask one question, and then we'll break for lunch.
Check.
Yep.
Hey, thanks so much for coming, by the way.
Yeah,
really
thanks.
appreciate the talk. You talked a lot about your hiring process and the working process, but not much about the firing process. And so I'm curious about that perspective as well. How do you know when someone doesn't fit? How do you negotiate those?
Sure. That's a really good question. Something we say, although we don't always live up to it, is it should never be a surprise. But we haven't always lived up to that ideal, unfortunately. So there's different reasons why someone might not be working out. One might be cultural mismatch, which is, you could pick that up pretty early. One is they plateaued, and they think they're better than they are, but they're not really anymore. Like they've grown to a certain level, but that's sort of where they plateaued, but they expect to continue to grow beyond that, but they're not doing that practically. Also, there's points where someone is like grown as high as they can in the company, and they want to, example, and by the way, I'm really not speaking to firing quite yet, but this is just like points where people decide they might want to leave, or we have to decide someone needs to leave, right? Another one is like, we don't have managers really in the company. There's like 2 or 3. So if someone wants to go up the chain and manage people, this is not the company for that. So part of it is some people decide to leave when they get to that point if they want to manage. Some people decide they want to go off and do their own business. Some people decide that, or we decide that there's not a good cultural fit. Sometimes they decide there's not a good cultural fit. If it's performance related, we try to get people on like a performance improvement plan and be very specific about like, here's what's not working. Like, here's what's not happening. Let's do these things, lay these things out over the next 6 months, or maybe it's 90 days, or maybe it's 30 days, depending. Let's lay this out and then get together at the end of that time frame and see how this has been working or not working. So that's actually the easiest one, is like performance issues. Harder ones are things like cultural mismatches or like interpersonal relationship issues, like 2 people just don't get along, or someone's like difficult. Those are very, very hard to deal with because, you know, for a long time, and just until recently, we didn't have anyone, we didn't have an HR department. So it was kind of this work out amongst yourselves, but that's actually not healthy either. So now we have someone who's sort of running people ops, is what we call it. So now we have a person they can go to and they can work that out amongst themselves. I've had to fire in the past 7 years, I've had to fire 2 designers. I only hire and fire designers. David hires and fires programmers. Kristen, who runs our customer service team, hires and fires customer service. So in my case, someone had been with us for, I'm not going to name names, someone had been with us for 4 years, and he just wasn't cutting it anymore. He just wasn't. There's a number of times when he said he'd have something done that wasn't done. There's a number of times, there was a laziness setting in, and that wasn't because he wasn't capable. I just think that it turned out that this wasn't the right job for him, ultimately. And I had to let him go after trying a number of times to get him back on the rails, basically. It just didn't happen, and he knew it and I knew it, and there was that. There was another time when somebody was, they couldn't break habits. It took them about a year. We kind of look at someone after a year and sort of look at them after a year and go, is this going to work here or not? And there's some people don't know, so let's help them. There's some people who are this just isn't going to work. Their habits are not compatible with our habits. Someone was just not comfortable making decisions without research backing it up and that sort of thing. And they're used to customer research. That's not how we do things. And they just weren't comfortable and confident enough in their own decisions really to make some of them. So we had to let him go after talking about it. But that one came a little bit as a surprise, unfortunately. So I'm just it never feels good when that's the case. But sometimes just there's no way to fix it. So that happens. Practically, severance. We give 1 month severance for every year you've been at the company. COBRA, health insurance, and as long as it's not a malicious reason we have to let someone go, we'll help you find another job. I'll do my best to refer you accurately and say, this is what this person's good at. They didn't fit here for this reason, but they would fit there for this reason. So we try and be very generous when we have to let someone go. And then some people leave for a variety of reasons as well. If they leave, it's not severance, but if they get fired, there's severance, and that's kind of how that goes. And we always wish people well when they leave. Whenever someone leaves or when someone's let go, they're always given an opportunity to write a message in Basecamp that goes out to everybody in the company saying goodbye. Here's my experiences here, good or bad. Thank you for it. Here's where I'm going next, whatever it is. And they post that message, and it's unedited. They can post whatever they want. And everybody in the company gets a chance to read it, and everyone responds. Most people respond, and most people are loved having you here, thank you very much, well wishes in your next journey. For example, just someone yesterday quit yesterday after being here for about a year. She is going somewhere else, and she's going to a better fit. And she wrote up a message, and we all wished her well, and we're this is making the right call, the right call. You're such a fan of this other company, and you finally got a chance to work there, you absolutely should do that, and that was the right decision, and everyone's really happy for her. So that happens too, but we always give everyone a chance to say goodbye themselves, because the worst thing is, and the other thing I'll say, I know I'm holding people from lunch, so last thing really quick, is that no matter why someone leaves, unless it's very personal in nature, we make sure that everybody in the company knows why that person left. Because the worst thing is when someone's gone, it's what happened to Bob? Oh, we don't talk about Bob anymore. Bob's just, because then people get anxious, what am I next? What happened? Bob was in this group, are they getting rid of this group? And people freak out, understandably. I would too. So no matter why someone leaves, as long as it's not a personal issue that's we can't talk about, for legal reasons or whatever, we always explain why someone leaves as openly and clearly as we can so everybody knows, and it clears the air, because there's always rumor and conjecture when someone leaves. You got to clear the air, otherwise it infects everybody and it's really dangerous. So hopefully that, say again? Yes. Yeah, we'll say this person was really good, at these things, but that's just not what we thought we needed from them. So they're great, actually. It's one of the designers we had to let go. He's a fucking great designer, but he's just not what we thought we were getting, and probably what he thought he was. It just didn't line up right. And we'll praise him for what he did and say this wasn't a good fit for these reasons. And we wish him well and are going to hope to help him find a new job somewhere else where he can shine. So we try to be as generous and fair and complete and clear as we can.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Jason, thanks so much for coming. This is great.
Thank you.